Hello everyone, this is Michael Tarallo, Expressor's Tech Evangelist. In this video, I wanted to go over some issues that newer Expressor users might run into, especially those that have used other ETL tools before and start using Expressor with the assumption that it will be just like one of those tools. So you might jump right in, start dragging and dropping, pointing and clicking, and tell yourself, I don't need to review any documentation, it's just like any other ETL, right? Well, not really. Expressor provides a different approach to data integration with its semantic framework. It introduces a concept of semantic types and schemas, which require a general understanding of where and how they are used. And then with this understanding, you will then be able to use the tool in a more fluid manner and then identify how the semantic types can provide value and benefit. So let's get started with a simple example. I'm going to walk you through some common starting approaches that reveal some interesting problems that require explanation. So we're going to take this from the perspective of a user who's just going to get started with Expressor and wants to take data, let's say from a file, and put it into a Microsoft SQL Server database. Pretty simple and common scenario. So we'll get started with Expressor Studio. I have already created a workspace, and I'm going to create a project. And we're going to keep the default name so we can move fluidly with this. And I'm going to create a connection. And in this file connection, I'm just going to navigate to my C drive, and I have a folder here called Demo. And then simple, and click next. So that creates a file connection artifact that will locate files within a particular file path that I've chosen. And I'm going to create another connection, and this is going to be a database connection. And we're going to use Microsoft SQL Server. And I'm going to provide the connection parameters for this database connection. And we'll, again, keep the default name. So now we have two artifacts, one to connect to a database and one to connect to a file path. Now we're going to create a data flow. Okay, and the data flow is the location where you start dragging and dropping operators. So let's say you're new and you want to start reading in a file and you want to write to a table. So the first thing you need to understand is that each read and write operator works on something called a schema. So after you select the connection, in this case file connection for the read file operators, you have to create what's called a schema. And a schema describes the actual structure of the external file. So in this case, we'll select new delimited schema, get data from file, select our data connection, and then we'll select our employee data.txt file. So the file connection artifact will automatically locate whatever files are in that path. We'll provide a sample representation of the file. You have your field delimiters, your record delimiters, your quote and escape. Please make sure that you understand the structure of your file. We will default to character return and line feed record delimiter, but if you downloaded a file from Linux, chances are your record delimiter is line feed. So maybe you want to open up the file within like a TextPad or UltraEdit or Notepad++ and view the caret symbols if you want to see the record delimiter. So in this case, character return line feed. And here I have a header record. So you can see this is employee ID, employee first name. We're just going to set all names from selected rows. That will show you the actual names of the fields to be put in the schema. And we'll create the name delimited schema 1. Okay, and then always make sure to skip the header record if you're using a file that has a header record. So that's setting up a read file. Now let's say we're going to work with an existing target table. So let's move into the connection, select the database connection. Now we're going to create what's called a table schema. What a table schema is, it describes the external structure of the target database. Select our database connection, navigate through the database structure, and there's my employee table. And it'll give it a name, Expressor DBO employee, and let's just end that with MS SQL, click finish. And now we have our schema for SQL Server. So right away, you'll notice that the icons are not green. So the operator indication is showing that it's yellow. And if you switch over to the message tab, you can see employee underscore ID, department, date hired, sex. All of these are not matching. And you'll see is required by one of the operators, but this requirement has not been satisfied. What that's saying is that the schema that's created for the delimited file is not matching the schema that is created from the target table. And when you create schemas and you have a representation known as a semantic type, which is the internal logical representation, those have to match. And that is one of our unique features within Expressor, utilizing what's called our semantic framework, where we represent an internal metadata or actionable layer that can apply error correction and constraints. And you'll see that in future video tutorials. But those have to match. So let me show you a couple approaches on how those will match. So the first thing that you can do is, and this is a recommended best practice, is start out always with your target structure. If you have an existing table, start out with your schema that exists in your target structure. So open up the existing right table schema, and you're going to see we create a one-to-one representation of the field structure, which is on the left side, the external layout of the records. And then you have the semantic type on the right side, which is your internal logical or actionable layer. So one of the things you also need to understand is we don't map from physical source to physical target. We map from a structure, physical source, to a semantic type, and then from the semantic type back to the physical target. Okay, so in this representation, what we're showing is the schema we're using to write to the table, and it's mapping the internal structure here. They're called attributes, and then the physical structures are called fields. So what we want to do is create this and make this available to then map within the read operation on the read delimited schema. So the way you do that is you take this structure, since this is your target structure, this is the one you want to conform to, and we click Share, Composite Type. And then the composite type is the collection of those attributes that are going to be made available to the delimited schema. So let's call this composite type. Actually, let's call it shared composite type from MS SQL. Okay, so when we do that, it creates a type. And if we open it up, a type is a collection of the attributes. Please understand, we'll get into this in future tutorials, but here's where you can set up your attribute names as well as your constraints for different data types, your data type conversions, corrective actions, and error handling. And this is all discussed in future videos or in a documentation as well. All right, so now we have the shared composite type from the target schema. So we're going to save that. Okay, we're going to go back to our data flow, and you're going to see that now the type has been crossed out. The local composite type, which is the one we create by default, is now crossed out, and now you can select your shared composite type. So that's step one. Now, the other thing we need to do is we need to match that to the read file or the delimited schema. So if we go to the delimited schema, which is being used by the read file, you could either open it up here or just open it up on the schemas menu. And then you're going to see the representation inside the schema editor where you have your delimited schema, again, the external structure in the file, as well as the internal semantic type or the representation or logical actionable layer. So what we need to do here is now assign what we just shared from the SQL Server schema. We created that composite type, that shared composite type that represented the target. So we click Assign and then select under Add to Schema, Shared. And then you'll notice it makes the representation here, project and project 2, scope, all shared types, shared composite type, and here's the representation of the attributes. Click OK. It'll attempt to make the mappings of the like names. We are improving this capability in future releases. Right now it just looks at the data type and the similar name. In the future, we're going to have a process that's going to remember and look into an internal structure that will remember what you've mapped in the past, and it'll make those recommendations based off of your previous selections with past projects. So here, now we're just going to map, and you always map from left to right, regardless if you're mapping from a source to a semantic type or from a target to a semantic type. The mapping is always done from left to right. So from the read file structure, what we're doing here is we're saying, okay, the employee first name coming in from the delimited file is going to map to first in the internal semantic type. And then we do the same thing for last and email and salary. Let's see, sex, we'll put that as sex. And what else do we have here? Years, we'll say that as age. And then no, we don't have any derived fields. So we could leave these blank for now, or department, for example, we could use that as a lookup process. You'll see that in an example in future tutorials as well. Right now, we're just mapping whatever's in the file to whatever's going to go into the database. We have date hired, so employee hire date. Okay, and you'll notice that there's these little lines and they highlight. These are called mappings. We're going to see that in a moment. But right now we've mapped everything from the external file structure to the internal semantic type. So we'll save that out. Go back to our data flow, click Read File, change from the local composite type to now that shared composite type. And you're going to notice everything is going to be green. There aren't any to-do messages, and we can run this. Now, when we run this, we're going to get an error. And I'm going to show you how to fix that and show you what are some of the common problems of why we've gotten that error. Okay, so let's execute this. And there's the error that I was talking about. And this is where newbies will run into problems because they might not be familiar with the semantic type. If we scroll down and we look at why it was rejected, you're going to see here that the error occurred in the read file operator named readFile1. And you can see if we scroll over, it'll say error parsing date time field into attribute employee hire date. The string 2011-1101 is not a valid date time according to the specified format. That is the default specified format that we will translate a string data type over into, let's say, a date time frame or a date time data type. So let me show you how to fix that. So if we first go to our source data and we scroll over, you can see here's the date for hire date. Notice that it's in year, month, day type format. So in order to fix that, in the read file, we go back into the delimited schema for the read file. And as I mentioned, the mapping, here's that mapping. Click on the little pencil, and we change the formatting and error corrections for the mapping. So in here, what this is saying is, okay, you are going to bring this into a date time field. So as you can see, employee hire date is a string. Anything that comes in from a file is a string. And you want to map it to a date time field that came out of the Microsoft SQL Server target database. Well, you need to tell me how I'm going to be able to read that file and how it's to be represented. So we have a variety of tokens that represent seconds, hours, months, days, years, etc. And these tokens are put in a format such as, in this case, how it's going to be read from the file. It's CC for the century, YY for the year, MM for the date, and DD. You could also use an M asterisk or a D asterisk representing, if it's a 1-digit or 2-digit type day or month, for example. So that's the default that we're going to put in for this example. Okay, we're going to save out that schema. So that's using a mapping to fix the date time conversion. Okay, now we're going to run this again, and you'll see it runs to completion without error. And if we switch over to the database and we go to Expressor, Tables, Employee, and get the records, you can see that now we have our data input. Now notice that there's more records in here. So say if I just wanted to truncate this, I can go to my write table operation, click truncate. What that will do is dump the records before writing the new record. So if I run this again and we go back, we execute, you can see now we have our 9 records. Okay, so that's one problem scenario with the best practice. Okay, that was where I grabbed a read file operator and a write table operator. And I said the best practice was to, if you have a target table, start out with the structure that is in the target table and share that and then assign it to the read file. So let's disable this step. Let's create a new step for step 2. And we're going to repeat that structure again, but this time I'm going to do it from the read file. Okay, because as a new person, not being familiar with the semantic types or schemas, you might do it this way and you might run into problems. So I'm going to kind of show you how to fix that particular problem this way. So let's go and grab our read file and let's grab our write table and let's configure the read file. And you could reuse some of these delimited schemas, but for this argument's sake, we're going to create a new one against the same data file. And we're just going to call it delimited schema 2. And now for the write table, same thing, database, new table schema. Finish. Okay, same concept again. Now we have our local composite types and our schemas. Skip my first record on the read file. Now, instead of using the target table, I'm going to use the read file delimited schema 2. So let's close all others and let's go into delimited schema 2. So in the beginning, I said to use the target table and then assign to the read schema or the delimited schema that was being used as a source. So what we're going to do next here is I'm going to go into the actual schema for the file. Once again, understanding that the left side is the external record structure and the right side is the internal semantic type or the logical representation. And what we're going to do is say, well, as employee hire date comes in, we're going to change that over to a date time. Okay, so that means now we're changing that conversion, and we're going to change the mapping appropriately as well. Okay, so that is now making a slight change to the semantic type on the delimited schema. And now I'm going to share this as the composite type. And I'll call this shared composite type from the delimited file. Save that. Okay, now I'm going to go to the right table operator. And you can see here's the Expressor DBO MS SQL 2 schema. We could open up that one over here. Okay, and you can see there's the one-to-one representation. So now what I'm going to do here is click Assign. It's kind of opposite of what we did in the beginning. So Assign Shared, and now we're going to select the shared composite type from delimited file. Do you want to automatically create mappings? Same concept. And now I'm going to map first and so forth. Last. And I think employee hire date. So employee hire date, and that's the last one. Okay, so now in this example, I don't have to change the mapping for date because we're going from the date that we've already done in the delimited file with the mapping of CC_YY-MM-DD to the actual date time format that's already in SQL Server. So we don't have to do that here. We've done it in the read file side. So let's save that. Go back to our data flows. And it's always important to understand is when you do sharing and assigning of data types, you always need to make sure you select it. So here's the type for the read file operator, shared composite type from delimited file. And here's the type from the right table operator, shared composite type from delimited file. And once again, our operators are green, and we could execute, and we get a successful execution. Okay, so this short video is just introducing you to some of the first-timer approaches when reading in a delimited file and writing to a database that have different structures, possibly different data types, and some of the practices that you can use for sharing and assigning composite types. Please contact me or leave comments in this blog entry or in this entry that's located in the forums at techevangelist@expressor-software.com if you have any additional questions or need additional clarification. Also contact me if there is any recommendations on what type of video tutorials you would like to see or areas that you need assistance with. I appreciate your time, everyone, and have a good day, and I hope to speak with you in the future.